Good Lord, it's like I've never recorded audio before. Holy Jesus. The ASMR is going to be so excellent on this podcast. Welcome in. Hold on to your seat cheeks. It's the Michael Welch Podcast. I've taken a little sabbatical since March. Took a little time. Did a little travel. Hit Tucson, Arizona. Hit San Francisco, California. Got very, very ill with an upper respiratory issue that I'm still fending off. Had a couple family issues. I covered a full gamut the past 4 months. But now it's almost college football season. It's almost football season for everybody. So, thought we'd review the 2022 college football season just to kind of get the juices going again. Just to kind of recap where we were at this time last season. And then we'll head off in the next couple weeks here to week 0 of 2023. So here is the 2022 college football season review.
Biggest third down in Bryce Young's career. You need 10. Play clock at 4. From the pocket. Launching downfield. Underthrown and intercepted. Kelee Ringo has an escort down the sidelines. All the way to the end zone. And Georgia is going to conquer the Crimson Tide. Bennett responding after the fumble with a tremendous throw and catch. And then the pick six to seal it. And one more play for the Georgia defense. Georgia on the mountaintop. Demons be gone, and the drought is over. National champions at long last.
So that was actually 2 national championship games back. Georgia's first one as they waxed off Alabama. Bryce Young was driving, 1:09 left in the game, 8-point difference, and of course the pick 6 there to salt the game away for the Georgia Bulldogs, right into the hands of Kelee Ringo, who would go on to be selected in the 4th round of the 2023 draft by the Eagles, taking that pick 6 back to lock up the blowout by the Georgia Bulldogs. The last grasp attempt there by the Heisman winner that year, Bryce Young, coming up just short. Of course, Alabama actually beat Georgia earlier that season to win the SEC title. And Georgia's first national championship there in 22 years. First time since 1980 at that particular time. So, big victory for the Georgia Bulldogs there. And last season, coming off that national championship, they were not preseason favorites at this time last year, heading into the 2022-23 college football season. Alabama was back up there again with Bryce Young driving the ship, if you will. Of course, some of the gripes by Alabama fans were that their top 2 receivers were out in that national championship game. One of the gentlemen going out in the SEC championship and another in the national championship, Jamison Williams, now a Detroit Lion, was one of those guys. But of course, there were a number of injuries there. It's just they did kind of run out of offensive weapons there against that great Georgia defense. Would that have changed things? Who knows? But the point is, in the splitting of series games 2 seasons back, Georgia won the national championship. However, not being favorites last season coming in, I have Alabama, Ohio State, then Georgia, as far as odds favorites, reflecting back. Then we had Clemson in the mix again, followed by USC under Lincoln Riley as 5th best odds. Then Texas A&M, Michigan, Notre Dame, Oklahoma, Texas, and the Utah Utes there, rounding out the top dozen teams there. Once the official AP poll dropped, it was Alabama overwhelmingly number 1, Ohio State, Georgia, just like the odds there. Clemson was the 4th, followed by Notre Dame at 5, Texas A&M 6, Utah, Michigan, Oklahoma, Baylor, rounding out the top 10. Then we had Oregon, Oklahoma State, NC State, USC, Michigan State, Miami, Pitt, Wisconsin, Arkansas, and Kentucky running out the top 20. Ole Miss, Wake Forest, Cincinnati, Houston, BYU rounding out the top 25 there. Ironic that 23, 24, 25 there, Cincinnati, Houston, BYU, all heading to the Big 12 for this season now. Several other teams receiving votes there: Tennessee, Texas, Iowa, Penn State, LSU, Purdue, who'd go on to win, of course, the Big Ten West, all in the mix there. Kansas State was much further down. Of course, they would win the Big 12 championship game. TCU, not on the board here, not in the mix, at least from the AP poll perspective. I believe Phil Steele, who does his preview magazine, had a note on them, and some other previews may as well, but at least according to the AP poll, no votes for TCU. So again, Alabama in that top spot. Receivers could have been an issue otherwise. Maybe they beat Georgia. Bryce Young is coming back. They're great linebackers back as well, who's received Heisman votes there in Mr. Will Anderson Jr. So the thought is that they're reloading heading into the 2022-23 season, so they will be fired up again. They returned 12 starters back, which was the most for Saban team in 6 years at that point, and pretty much every publication and magazine had them at the number 1 spot. They had the number 2 recruiting class of all time, according to recruiting metrics, after Texas A&M's number 1 recruiting class of all time, now that the NIL is in full effect. And of course, last season we had the little back and forth between Nick Saban and Jimbo Fisher that made headlines briefly in the offseason, where audio made it out of Nick Saban speaking at a booster event about Texas A&M just buying their team, like that's some wicked, evil thing. Of course, you're not supposed to be able to just purchase a team per se, but once kids are on campus, they're allowed to basically collect endorsement money to endorse whatever, and the collectives that you hear about as part of these schools basically place and set up these different endorsements for kids or college students. But you're not supposed to just outright offer this money up front to come to the school, to my understanding. But now state to state, it sounds like it's a little bit different, but at least in that circumstance, you're not supposed to be able to just offer a guy money straight up. It's once you're recruited, they can set up these collectives, often set up the endorsements for you. But again, that's kind of lost in the sauce of NIL money is too much, and a lot of other things. But the main point is there's a bit of back and forth over much ado about nothing really between Saban and Jimbo Fisher, where Texas A&M had the number 1 overall recruiting class ever, according to metrics last year, and Mr. Saban had the number 2. As for number 2 in the AP poll, Ohio State, recapping why they might be in that particular place going into the season. They were 11-2, 2021, 2 years back. They had the early season loss to Oregon at home, which is a bit surprising, big surprising. They had the ball run down their throat, I believe, by the Ducks there. Waddled on in and waddled on out after the destruction. They had their first loss to Michigan since 2011. Kept the squad out of the Big Ten and national championship picture. They did make the Rose Bowl there, where they played a legendary game against the Utah Utes. They outlasted them 48-45. Never fell out of the top 10 all season. C.J. Stroud came back and was under center. Chris Olave was off to the Saints. Jackson Smith, Najigba, of course, last year was projected to be a big-time player. Marvin Harrison Jr., who scored 3 touchdowns and first made his, I don't want to say his name known, of course, because of his legendary father, but he scored 3 touchdowns in the against Utah in the Rose Bowl a couple of years back, and it was just another loaded skills position group. Loaded running back room again. Jim Knowles was poached from Oklahoma State and imported in with his defense was top 5 with Oklahoma State, and he was brought in to improve the Buckeyes defense last season. So they checked in at number 2 at this time last year in the AP poll. Georgia had lost 15 picks to the NFL after their first national championship there. through its self-imposed ceiling. Georgia will never break through. Well, teams like Alabama, Auburn, Florida, LSU, Tennessee, at least in '98, all those teams of the SEC had at least claimed multiple national championship titles in that 40-year span between themselves winning their next national championship. They were never considered a national power. Now, back in the mix, at least number 3 in the rankings, in the conversation. Pollsters, again, weren't quite ready to put them above Alabama. Stetson Bennett was back officially as the starter. Jalen Carter, the disruptive nose tackle, rightfully tagged as a key piece of the defense, was back in. Of course, 2 years ago, Stetson Bennett was, of course, the story, the walk-on, not expected to play. JT Daniels from USC probably would have stayed the starter if he could stay healthy, honestly. He had a number of injury issues and was iffy for a couple games, including getting ruled out within hours of a couple of tip times. There was another kid there who was number 2 on the depth chart, I believe, who was a Wake Forest transfer who just didn't quite work out. I don't remember his exact issues, but Stetson Bennett, further down the depth chart, worked his way in. We all know the story now, but officially the starter as of last year after really only starting a handful of games 2 seasons back. So number 3 in the poll at this time last year, heading into the season, the Georgia Bulldogs. Clemson, quite generous to check in where they were at number 4 after a 9-3 season, where things actually could have been worse. You can do maybe it could have been better as well, but 7 games were decided by one score in 2021, and the team fell out of the top 25 after a 4-3 start. It was just terribly ugly. The squad didn't play for or win the ACC for the first time since 2014 and needed a bowl win over Iowa State to hit double-digit wins. Playmakers were lacking on both sides of the ball. That seems like it's going to be an ongoing problem this season. DJ Ungalele didn't pick up where Trevor Lawrence left off. Debo didn't make jaw-dropping coaching changes in the offseason, or did he use the transfer portal much? And that hasn't changed much either. Or he didn't bring in top-level recruiting classes either. The ranking was partially trust in Debo in the weak ACC. That's still the case. So not much has changed in Clemson heading into this year or last year or, probably moving forward a whole lot, although it seems like his mind's starting to change a little bit on the transfer portal. But Clemson checking in last year at number 4. I expect they will be top 8, at least, in the preseason poll this year. We'll see. By the time this podcast comes out, I believe it'll line up with the release of the AP poll for the 2023-24 season. Notre Dame last year, number 5 to start out with. They were a whopping 1-11 in 2021. They were never really in the hunt for a playoff spot. The main issue was the loss to Cincinnati, their only loss, and then Cincinnati stayed ahead of them the whole way in the polls for a playoff spot. So Notre Dame was really never in the mix. It was rightfully so. Cincinnati beat them, stayed ahead of them. You can make argument on the schedules. Should Notre Dame jump them? But they won the head-to-head. So perhaps this was the push that Brian Kelly needed to finally leave if he wanted to pull down a big job and have a real shot at a national championship. So he did. He went at the end of the season, even with one loss. They went on, so they finished 11-2 after the Fiesta Bowl loss to Oklahoma State, and he went ahead to the LSU job, handing the job off to the head coaching job at Notre Dame off to assistant Marcus Freeman in the process there. And last year was the same as it's going to be heading in this year. Not a lot of trust in big playmakers there, just a lot of thought in trusting the process. They're going to be good in the trenches, good at running back, a decent a quarterback, but not a big name. They haven't had a big name there since Brady Quinn 15 years ago at this point, and it's much the same sentiment heading into this season as it was last year for the Notre Dame Irish. All right, number 6 was Texas A&M. They were 8-4 in 2021. 25th in the final AP poll, which was released just prior to the bowl games. I think they do one more after that, but that's what I screen groped there. That's what I grabbed. 25th in the final AP poll, after going 8-4 in 2021 in preseason. In preseason, number 6 at this time last season. They did not play in a bowl game due to COVID issues. I think they were the only team that had that problem. I think they were matched up against UCLA, if I wasn't mistaken, and they ended up their replacement was Rutgers. I don't know, 2 years ago. That's not what we're looking at now. They entered 2021 as number 6 in the poll. 2022 is number 6 in the polls. They're thought to be the number 1 ranked recruiting class ever, as I stated previously. And that class was thought to provide an instant impact with the accumulation of talent across the board, particularly on the defensive end for them, particularly on the front four. That would not work out, as we all know. They suffered injuries, including freshman Haynes King, who was the starter, and offensive line issues 2 years ago. There was a thought that that group would kind of come together last year and really be something special with the infusion of the talent, particularly on the defensive side of the ball. They started 3-2 2 seasons back before beating number 1 Alabama in College Station with a big walk-off field goal, but the team was not in the SEC conversation all year. So the thought was, heading into 22-23, was that they would be healthy, the offensive pieces would come together, the defense would be infused with some young talent, and hell, they managed to beat Alabama despite all the issues the year prior. So this will be a great team, right? This will be a great team. Number 7, Utah won the Pac-12 in 2021 after a 1-2 start and a quarterback change from Charlie Brewer to Cameron Rising, a name we now all know because he's been a starter for 2+ years. They waxed Oregon twice in 3 weeks by a combined 76-17 score. Those of us that were paying attention certainly remember that, expecting to see a really big end of the season matchup there as they wrecked the Ducks and then played them again in the Pac-12 championship game. We thought, maybe the Ducks will make some adjustments, and absolutely not, as they decimated them again 2 weeks later. So they came out as the clear number 1 in the conference. It also reflected poorly on that Ohio State team that had lost at home to Oregon earlier in the year. And in retrospect, it made a little bit more sense when they fell to Michigan after winning for 8 consecutive years or whatever the lineup was at that particular point. So put a lot of things in perspective after the 21-22 season there. But big year for the Utah Utes. They would lose that shootout to Ohio State in the Rose Bowl. They had a couple key players on both sides sitting out, but that was an epic game. And again, Cam Rising back for last year. He'll be back again for this season. Number 8 was the Michigan Wolverines. They had lost to their rival Michigan State, but beat Ohio State soundly, as we just covered. They had made the playoffs, where they were smothered by Georgia 34-11. Not awesome. Cade McNamara had a great season at quarterback, but J.J. McCarthy looked promising in limited 2021 time. The quarterback spot was in question heading into the season, as you remember, in 22. But Harbaugh would make the announcement that an easy non-conference schedule would allow for a little bit of rotating starts there. Hawaii and UConn, they would go back and forth, and he would use that to kind of sort out the starter heading into conference play. Really, he was just looking for a reason to put JJ in, and JJ didn't let him down. So I was able to go to that Hawaii game where he threw a handful of touchdowns in the first half. I believe McNamara did play the back end of that, but as we know, JJ McCarthy did take the reins. Clemson at number 9. They lost Brent Venables, their defensive coordinator, who'd been there several years and been a key piece to their national championships there. He was given the keys to Oklahoma, who was reloading after Lincoln Riley, in turn, had headed to USC, taking several players with him, including Caleb Williams. Oklahoma was 11-2 in 2021. Venables had to rebuild a bad defense. Lincoln Riley isn't exactly known for that side of the ball. Insert quarterback QB Dylan Gabriel from Central Florida into the pilot seat of the offense. Good quarterback there. He'll be back this season as well. And he had to navigate a toss-up Big 12, which brings us to number 10 on the list, which was Baylor. Now, the Bears surprised everyone by playing against Oklahoma State in the Big 12 championship game in 2021. Neither of those squads was expected to make it. The Bears were 10-2 entering the game there. Oklahoma State was 11-1. A last-second stop on the goal line gave Baylor the win and prevented Oklahoma State from making it into the playoffs. But don't forget that 2021 season. Again, Oklahoma State always expected to be competitive there. Baylor kind of came out of nowhere. Just wild, because last season, Kansas State and TCU were expected to be the two hot picks as wild cards in the Big 12 championship race, but neither one of them were picked to make it there either, let alone win it. So what's going to happen this year in the Big 12? Is Texas really going to make it? It just poses a lot of questions. Will Oklahoma make it? I just don't know. But yeah, that was the case for Baylor being at number 10 last season. As we know, they didn't end up anywhere near there. But Oklahoma, of course, one spot above in what was a wild card Big 12 there, and it'll be again this season. Number 11 was Oregon. Dan Lanning, the Georgia defensive coordinator, hot off a title, taking over from Mario Cristobal, who himself went to Miami. He took the job from what's his name? That other guy who moved to defensive coordinator for Penn State. We'll get to him shortly. But the old Duckaroos were in at the 11th spot with a new head coach, first-time head coach. USC was expected to be in the Pac-12 conversation immediately with Lincoln Riley coming to town. USC, of course, who crushed Oregon twice, in the mix there and ranked ahead of them. Bo Nix was a wild card, transferring in from Auburn after several years and offensive coordinators, mediocre seasons, to take in the quarterback spot. A lot of different movement here, so not sure what to expect from Oregon initially, but they were in the 11 hole. At 12, another Big 12 team, that Oklahoma State. So again, not knowing what's going to happen in the Big 12, but thinking it's going to be very competitive. Third Big 12 team in the 9 to 12 spot. Voters unsure what to do. Coming off the Big 12 appearance. Always win at least 8 games here for Mr. Mike Gundy. So not surprising to see them ranked that highly. To kind of run through the back end of the list here, number 13 was NC State. They were 9-3 and ranked 20th in the final 2021 AP poll, bringing back a veteran quarterback in Nick Leary and a veteran linebacking group as well. Number 14 was USC, who was 4-8 in 2021. Caleb Williams was expected to do big things. Of course he did. Lincoln Riley, Jordan Addison, the wide receiver of the year, transferring in from Pitt to come play with the boys there. Number 15 was Michigan State, who was 11-2. They finished 9th in 2021, thanks to Kenneth Walker. Number 16 was the Miami Hurricanes. They were 7-5 in 2021 and finished unranked. Mario Cristobal, like I said, coming in from Oregon. Quarterback Tyler Van Dyke finished out strong. Projected to possibly a NFL quarterback first rounder if he performed well last season. We know how that went, not so great. But that's where they were ranked there, 16th, coming off a rough season in 2021. Manny Diaz was fired. Man, that was on the tip of my head. Manny Diaz was their former coach there, good defensive coach. He did take the job as defensive coordinator at Penn State. So that's where he will be. That's where he was last season, and that'll be great. But that's who Mario Cristobal took the job from there. Number 17 was Pittsburgh. They were 11-3 and won the ACC championship game against Wake 45-21 before they were rolled by Michigan State in the Peach Bowl. They finished number 12 in 2021, so they were number 17 in last year's preseason poll. 18 was the Wisconsin Whiskies. They were 9-4, finished unranked after 2021. They missed a shot to make the Big Ten championship game by losing to the Minnesota Gophers in the final regular season game. They beat Arizona State 20-13 in their bowl game. So Wisconsin, of course, always in the mix. Number 19 was Arkansas. 9-4, 21 in the final poll. Beat Texas. Lost to Alabama 42-35 on the road. Beat Penn State in the Outback Bowl. So not a bad squad at all entering last season. Had a very, very, very difficult schedule and had a lot of injuries last year. Tough beat for the Hogs. Number 20 was Kentucky. They'd finished 10-3. They beat Iowa in the Citrus Bowl, which is not difficult when you only have to put up 13 points. They were bringing back Will Levis, an NFL prospect at quarterback, according to some. At number 21, Ole Miss in year 3 under Lane Kiffin. The Rebels went 10-2 in 2021 with losses on the road to Auburn and Alabama, but a nice run through the schedule otherwise. They lost to Baylor in the Sugar Bowl when quarterback Matt Corral was injured early and the backup was non-existent. Number 22, Wake Forest was 11-2 behind a high-powered offense, but fell to Pitt in the ACC championship game. They finished 15th, so they were 22nd in the preseason poll, bringing back Sam Hartman at quarterback. Number 23, Cincinnati, coming off the playoff run, 13-1 record. Luke Fickell still in place there. Number 24 was Houston, coming off a 12-2 record and 17 finish. Still a good program there. 25th was BYU, coming off a 10-3 record and a 19th finish. That was kind of the back end of the poll there. There weren't any big rule changes heading into the 22-23 season, not like there will be in the 23-24 season. A couple adjustments to observing blocking below the waist a little bit more carefully. The appealing second half targeting penalties as far as suspensions for the following game, but nothing too concerning, really. Storylines. Some of the big ones, obviously, were the transfer portal and NIL. Now, those went to effect. The NIL was approved July 1st, 2021. The transfer portal changes were made August 31st, 2021, were two big key dates for those two things, which meant that last year was the first time that there was a big full off-season and year with those in effect heading into a football season. Because heading into the 21-22 season, those had just went into effect despite a lot of discussions around them. So last season, with the number 1 Texas A&M recruiting class and number 2 Alabama recruiting class, that was the first time that both the transfer portal rules had changed and the NIL had gone into effect. So this year, the 23-24, where we're continuing to see a lot of transfer portal talk and NIL, a lot of complaints about it, a little too much, quite frankly. I like to see the player movement and compensation. It's only the second full year of that, and last season, as we're discussing, was the first full season that both of those items went into effect. The full transfer portal rules, wherever you want to go. You can certainly go. If you want to transfer a second time, there's some stipulations with that. And then NIL, of course. So those are the big storylines heading into last season. And certainly before that, but last season certainly. And let's talk about some of the preseason award nominations of guys that were expected to have big performances. Now, there is a lot of unanimous selections, a lot of guys in the mix that probably aren't too surprising. A lot of it's based on previous year performance, and a lot of guys that are in preseason selections for first team, second team, third team, that kind of thing, preseason All-American type of stuff, end up there, I think, at the end of the season, based on the last couple of years that I've gone back to look at things, and based on AP polls and preview magazine stuff and that kind of thing. A lot of them are pretty much the same across the board. There's a few here and there that are different. But last season, Bryce Young out of Alabama, Caleb Williams, USC, CJ Stroud, Ohio State. We're on everybody's radars. 1, 2, 3, somewhere in the mix there. First team, second team, third team, preseason All-American guys. Jake Haener for Fresno State made the fourth team for Phil Steele. He was banged up last year, but certainly had a right to be on some lists. Running backs were Bijan Robinson of Texas, Deuce Vaughn of Kansas State, Trevion Henderson of Ohio State, all across the board. Jackson Smith-Njigba, wide receiver out of Ohio State, Jordan Addison out of Pitt, Keyshawn Butte out of LSU, Xavier Worthy out of Texas, Quentin Johnston out of TCU, and Josh Downs out of North Carolina. If you were watching football last year, just nationally, big games, you would know all of those names. And they had an impact the year previous as well, so you would know all of those guys. Tight end, Brock Bowers of Georgia, no surprise. Michael Myers of Notre Dame. At offensive tackle, you have the kid from Northwestern, Peter Schwarnowski. Paris Johnson Jr. out of Ohio State, Connor Galvin out of Baylor. At guard, Andrew Voorhees out of USC. I always want to say Voorhees. It's not a horror movie. Layden Robinson of Texas A&M. You have the Minnesota center, John Schmitz. Jarrett Patterson out of Notre Dame. Aluskin, I will not say his name right, but the Michigan center. A lot of those guys, whether you're looking at Phil Steele, Athens, Lindsay's, CBS Sports, Yahoo, AP selections, those guys are on all the lists, all over. There's not a lot of deviation anywhere, whether it's common mind, thought, or just looking at previous year's performance. There's not a lot of deviation in any of those picks. At defensive line, Jalen Carter out of Georgia, Killon Cansey out of Pittsburgh as well. Of course, that's Sackmaster U over there at Pittsburgh on that defensive line. Will McDonald IV out of Iowa State. Miles Murphy out of Clemson. That defensive line getting a lot of hype out of Clemson the past couple years. And it certainly has not been up there as far as the most productive unit, but they've had injuries. And Brian Brees out of Clemson as well. Linebacker, Will Anderson out of Alabama, of course, was receiving Heisman votes after the 21-22 season. Andre Carter II out of Army. Nolan Smith out of Georgia. Noel Sewell out of Oregon. And Jack Campbell, of course, out of Iowa. He's now a Detroit Lion. Kaylee Ringo, as we were talking about earlier, out of Georgia. Riley Moss out of Iowa, two of the corners. Eli Rogers out of Alabama, big name, everyone knows that one. Joey Porter Jr. out of Penn State, all names you know if you've watched these teams, big key players, as well as Jordan Battle out of Alabama, Brandon Joseph out of Notre Dame, Antonio Johnson out of Texas A&M, defensive backs as well. Kickers, Missouri's kicker, Harrison Mevins, for those who watched some of the Tigers, and Jake Moody, of course, out of Michigan, and that punter out of Rutgers, Adam Korsak, was always coming out to great applause, and really put them in better field position than their offense ever did. I believe he left this season, so Rutgers will have to really generate on the offensive side of the ball, I guess, this season. So if you want to know impact players for this upcoming season, the 23-24, I'd pay close attention just to who the front runners are to make these first, second, third team candidates, regardless of where you're looking at. AP nominations, Yahoo, CBS, wherever. There's a lot of consensus, and a lot of it pans out unless there's injury. So a lot of these guys that were preseason selections to be key players panned out that way, and at the end of the season were selected to at least all conference teams for the most part. So a lot of that holds true. Now, we did have the transfer portal, like I said, going, of course. And some of the big names that were on the move there that we all remember. Jordan Addison moving from Pittsburgh to USC. One of the big grabs that Lincoln Riley got, perhaps the biggest grab that he got there. Jackson Dart was kicked out of USC. Not kicked out, shouldn't say that. He decided to transfer out of USC, and he headed to Ole Miss to play for Lane Kiffin. He ultimately won the starting job there. So Jackson Dart, true freshman, played a few games in their horrible 4-8 season the year previous, but he transferred out. Zach Evans, if you remember, transferred out of TCU to Ole Miss. who had a great ground game last year. Of course, he joined Jackson Dart there, but TCU lost a great back there, the team who went to the national championship game last year. So a good player moving from one good team to another. Quentin Ewers enrolled early to go to Ohio State. Made a couple of appearances there, but ultimately transferred to Texas where he played last year. Of course, he got a little banged up, but looked good against Alabama early in the season before getting knocked out in the first half there. And it was kind of iffy in the back half of the year, but we'll kind of walk through that a little bit as we move forward. Big expectations for this season. Dylan Gabriel, quarterback, moving from Central Florida, where he was very productive, to Oklahoma. He also had some injuries that limited Oklahoma's ceiling offensively, and we know that the defense was a rebuilding project, to say the least. Georgia Tech has really been in shambles since making a coaching change a few years back. Jamar Gibbs, the running back, moved out and moved to Alabama to play for the Crimson Tide, and despite the thought that they would, of course, move back into national championship contention, not that they were that far off, but obviously did not make the playoffs, had even greater issues with playmakers, but Jamar Gibbs was a big piece of that, moving from Georgia Tech to Alabama. Defensive end, Ibe Ayuki, I'm not going to say that right at all, but the Michigan kid, defensive end, moved from UT Martin out there to Wolverine country, making a big impact as another great defensive end there for the Michigan Wolverines in making another playoff appearance. Michael Penix Jr., moving from Indiana to Washington. In the 2020 shortened season, he made a name for himself, including the big extension play in overtime for a 2-point conversion against Penn State, where he hit the pylon, pulled a big upset for over Penn State there on the 2-pointer. And then had a lost season again as Indiana struggled in 21 and 22. Last season, he transferred to Washington in an otherwise unnoteworthy move and became number 2 in passing yards nationally. Completely changed what was going on there. New head coach with some issues that Washington was having. So new head coach, new quarterback transferring in, explosive offense. Turned out to be a really big deal. Spencer Rattler, supposed to win the Heisman a couple years back, struggled, lost his job, no fault of his own, to, of course, Caleb Williams. It's tough when you lose your job to a future Heisman winner. Transferring from Oklahoma to South Carolina there. That situation actually reminds me a bit of Clemson's situation, where Trevor Lawrence was such a big prospect and then really bared that out, taking over the starting position from Kelly Bryant. You probably don't remember the name, but he was the quarterback between Deshaun Watson and Kelly Bryant for Clemson. He did not win a national championship there, but he did win an ACC title, led a really great team there for a full year as a starter, played a couple years behind Deshaun Watson before he took over the starting role. And then when Trevor Lawrence was a freshman and Kelly Bryant didn't even really struggle, but the offense as a whole was a little bit problematic. Trevor Lawrence ultimately came in and phased him out, and Kelly Bryant eventually transferred to Missouri, finished out his career. I think he was a little banged up. I'm not even sure if he got drafted into the NFL, but just disappeared. Debo didn't even give him a championship ring when they did win that the Trevor Lawrence freshman season, which is a bit unfortunate because Kelly was there for part of that and a long-time tenured Clemson Tiger. But I'm going off on a tangent a bit here. But Spencer Rattler, similar situation. He could still be a great quarterback. The back end of the South Carolina year last season, obviously, 2 big wins, Clemson and Notre Dame, I believe it was. Even after a so-so season, just losing his job to what could be the best talent since Trevor Lawrence and Caleb Williams. Just a similar situation, just getting phased right out of the position. It's just a tough situation for him. But he moved from Oklahoma to South Carolina last season. Cameron Ward was another quarterback that was on the move. He moved from Incarnate Word, followed his offensive coordinator to Washington State. Of course, they had gone through a coaching change after their prior regime was the only staff to not get a vaccination. I think in the whole country. I think that was then required under the NCAA mandate. That piece I don't have in my notes here, so if I'm wrong, I'm wrong. But that staff was, I believe, the only one, at least in Division I football in the country, that had multiple firings, including their head coach, due to not following a vaccination mandate. So new staff there, a new offensive coordinator, Cameron Ward, following his OC over from Incarnate Ward. And they won a big game early over Wisconsin there in Wisconsin country, in Badger country there. Mario Williams, wide receiver, moved from Oklahoma to USC as well, following his quarterback and his head coach. Bo Nix, of course, moving from Auburn, where he had a different offensive coordinator every single year, to the Oregon Ducks, who are retooling, we'll say, with a new head coach and just a new roster there. He was one of the pieces. Adrian Martinez from Nebraska, heading to Kent State, taking over the starting position there. JT Daniels from Georgia to West Virginia. Of course, he'd already moved from USC to Georgia, went to another program, his third program, West Virginia, last season. And if I'm not mistaken, he's at yet another program this year. Rice. He's at Rice this year. Yep, that's where he's at. So JT Daniels, just skipping around. Don't forget that. If you're looking at betting lines or spreads, Rice has like a real quarterback this year. Just keep that in the back of your mind. He may have been at several different schools and working his way down as he goes, but JT Daniels is playing at Rice this season. He was the former Gatorade Male Athlete of the Year in high school. He had some injury issues last season that Stetson Bennett just ended up coming in and taking the job, but it was really a fight when he was healthy that kind of kept the position there. So arguably, if he was still in good shape, it's a possibility that Stenson would still be on the bench. And the USC year he had there was just bad. So it's possible. West Virginia also in a bad shape. Surprising that their coach has made it into this season. He could be the first one out the door in the 23-24 season. So tough luck, some injuries, but still a talented kid. So just keep that in mind. Keldon Slovis, another talented guy, moving from USC to Pitt. A 4-8 season really screws things up for you. Two top quarterback prospects there in Jackson Dart and Slovis, and all of a sudden they're both on the move. Slovis went to Pittsburgh there. Mixed results on the season. We'll see what he does this year. Jaden DeLora moved from that Washington State Cougar program to Arizona. Arizona's over-under last year, I believe, was 2.5, and they doubled that. They didn't quite make a bowl game, and he was great. He was the Pac-12 Offensive Player of the Year in 2021, and he was able to do a good job with Arizona last year. It came close to beating USC, actually, so that was a good move for DeLora. One of the other notable ones was Michigan getting a big center in the former Outland Trophy and Remington Trophy winner in Uscombe, who moved from Virginia to Michigan to play a little bit better ball there. That was a huge get in the football world landscape, even if he wasn't a big-name wide receiver, and certainly assisted that team there. Kyle Van Treese moved from Buffalo to Georgia Southern. Not notable to most folks, but he was top 5 in passing yards last season for a good Georgia Southern team there in the Sun Belt Conference. A couple guys moved out of Alabama to other programs. Drew Sanders at linebacker moved to Arkansas from the Tide. Jaleel Billingsley, big tight end, moved to Texas. He's been productive for them. Jermaine Burton moved from Georgia to Alabama. That was a notable offseason note as well. And there were several others, but those were some of the big ones there. So, big coaching changes. Lincoln Riley, of course, from Oklahoma to USC, replacing Clay Helton. That was probably, we had lots of big moves, so I can't even say it's the biggest move. Clay Helton, though, went to that Georgia Southern program, so watch out for that group there. They were a decent squad last year, came close to beating UCLA. Jim Mora, former UCLA guy there, another former Power 5 and NFL coach, took over a small program in UConn. He spent his last 4 years actually in television, so he's been kind of out of the game a little bit, but got them to respectability last season. Brent Venables moved from the Clemson defensive coordinator position to the Oklahoma Sooners. Tony Elliott moved to Virginia to take over for Bronco Mendenhall. He also moved from the Clemson coaching tree there. Mario Cristobal moved from Oregon to Miami, as stated already, replacing Manny Diaz, who took the Penn State defensive coordinator position, so that was also a big move. Now, where did the former Penn State defensive coordinator go? Well, that was Brent Pry, and he went and took Virginia Tech's head coaching position. Daniel Lanning, Georgia defensive coordinator, went and took the Oregon head spot. Brian Kelly was the other huge move, taking over LSU for Ed Orgeron. Assistant Marcus Freeman then took over at Notre Dame, so that was a couple big moves there. Billy Napier made the leap from Louisiana in the Sun Belt to Florida to replace Dan Mullen there. Gary Patterson was bumped out of TCU after a long tenure, and he became a special consultant at Texas then. He's not on the sidelines. He's not really on the coaching staff. Not really sure what he does. Not sure if he holds that title this year, but that's officially what he was noted as becoming in the college football news cycles. Sonny Dykes from SMU then took over that TCU job. And obviously, if you were watching football last year, you heard a whole lot about Sonny Dykes and their nice run there. Rhett Lashley took over the SMU job then after his offensive coordinator, quarterback coaching duty at Miami. So that's where he came out from. Washington removed the intern tag from Keldon DeBoer. Coach Jimmy Lake was the gentleman that was fired after a sideline exchange with a player in 2021, and just some weirdness there. But Lake is gone. Keldon DeBoer took over as the intern, and again brought in Michael Penix, and the two of them are supercharged and ready to do some bigger things even this year. Washington State removed the intern tag from defensive coordinator Jake Dickert. What a name. He took over after Nick Rolovich was released after the weird vaccination dispute, we'll call, from 2020-2021. So those are some of the notable coaching changes. Again, Lincoln Riley was one of the big ones, along with Brian Kelly. I'd say just two notable guys moving from big programs to another big program. Of course, Mario Cristobal. There we go. Mario Cristobal moving to Miami because that's such a big position. Brent Venables at Oklahoma, and Dan Lanning at Oregon because those three are such big programs. Billy Napier at Florida too, were some of the other ones. Gary Patterson also being notable because of TCU's success as well. So let's talk about the actual season and the week-to-week games a little bit. Week 0, a tradition unlike any other. Only a handful of games, couple handfuls usually. I think we've got 7 this year. Last year, about the same thing. Only a couple Power 5 teams really participate, and only one semi-decent game really is the Big Ten participates in the interconference game every year. Last season, it was Northwestern in Nebraska in Aviva Stadium in Dublin, Ireland. What a stellar matchup. Nothing quite like sending Nebraska University, who's about to fire its coach, and a little private-sized school out of Illinois over the ocean there to show off for our friends over there in Ireland in a small little cupcake game there. Scott Frost's job was indeed on the hot seat after a difficult time making the move from his great time at Central Florida, where they were the self-described national champions in, was that the 17-18 season? After going undefeated that year, he struggled to be productive in the Big Ten. Well, sending him overseas was not awesome but it was a great win for Northwestern. They led 17-14 at the half. Nebraska scored 2 touchdowns in 30 seconds of game time in the third quarter to come back and take a 28-17 lead. Northwestern ultimately rallied and won 31-28. Wildcats missed a field goal that could have been critical, but 2 fourth quarter Casey Thompson interceptions by the Texas transfer there sealed the Nebraska implosion, including one in trying to make a put together a drive to win the game with under a minute to go. Really sealed the deal there. The former Texas transfer supposed to steady the ship, but he threw for 355 yards, and the wheels just came off for him. Too many turnovers. Northwestern ran for over 200 yards in the slow grind, and the Wildcats would not win another game on the year. They have not won a game in the United States in over a season now. So that certainly didn't help the Scott Frost buzz on the hot seat there with a loss overseas in that game. Decent back and forth game. This opened the season though. Illinois also played. They played Wyoming 38-6. Waxed them off pretty good there. Showed off their defensive front, which was top 5 in the country, and some defensive categories there. Vanderbilt exploded for 35 points in the third quarter in a 63-10 win over Hawaii. Not much was expected of the Islanders last season, but not a lot's usually expected of Vanderbilt. That would show a little bit of their offense there, as they had one of their best seasons in a long time last season. It started by putting 63 points, as a decent team at least should, on a bad Hawaii team. North Carolina, piloted by Drake May, would win 56-24 over Texas A&M. May displayed his ability, as they say, going 29 of 37, I can count, for 294 yards, 5 touchdowns, and the defense showed its inability, giving up 279 passing yards to the Rattlesnakes of Florida A&M. Now May took over for Sam Howell, who went on to the NFL. He was drafted by the Commanders. Not much was known about May. Top prospect. Mac Brown up there recruits quite a few of them. We just weren't sure what he was going to be. And he's going to be the number 2, arguably the number 2 quarterback in the country behind Caleb Williams at USC, heading into the 23-24 season. And that was really built on the back of great offensive performances last year. But he had to do that a lot. Defense was not very good. Another mark, unfortunately, of Mac Brown teams there at University of North Carolina, unfortunately. Just not been the same since his Texas days. Florida State also waxed Duquesne. Just a footnote there, really. And just to prove to myself that I can indeed pronounce Duquesne. Week number 1, which is a big week every year, going into Labor Day. So we generally get football. We did last year's. We did this Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and Monday, the first full week of college football. And we get 5 straight days of games. And we usually get at least one great game every day. It's not like we get some unwatchable garbage in there. Pretty much at least a few marquee matchups every single day. Thursday open with the backyard brawl rivalry between West Virginia and Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh, of course, piloted by Slovic from USC. JT Daniels at West Virginia. 38-31 was the final for Pittsburgh, but JT Daniels was driving late in a great back and forth game. His receiver couldn't quite get his hands under the ball late, but nearly had an opportunity to tie this game and send it into overtime.
It all comes down to this. Daniels takes a shot. Was that caught? That was Reese Smith.
We got to see that one again.
And the officials are discussing it.
That ball's moving.
Matt Austin. It's coming down to this call right here.
His hand under it? No. The ball's moving. That's not a catch.
Ball, I agree with Lewis. That ball's rolling into the end zone. That's going to be incomplete.
We've had 133 ball plays tonight.
After further review, the receiver lost possession of the ball when it hit the ground. The pass is incomplete. It will be first down kick at the previous spot.
Again, that was a 4th and 16 from the about 15-yard line, but the ball was dropped at the 2. That was coming off of the previous drive, which was a pick 6 on a tie game, where JT Daniels' throw was returned for what would be the game-winning score by Pittsburgh. So just tough luck there for JT Daniels trying to make up for his own mistake. But another great game there. The first great game, I wouldn't call Nebraska and Northwestern quite that. But our first great game there on Thursday night. Tennessee did roll Ball State 59-10 for a little foreshadowing of how the season would look. We did have another interesting game that I was watching. Central Michigan had the ball down 58-44 with 2:13 left at number 12 Oklahoma State. The Chips were returning the 2021 leading rusher nationally, and Lewis Nichols III. He was banged up late last season and struggled a little bit, but great running back there. Cowboys defense didn't look so hot coming off that 2021 Big 12 championship game, allowing the Chips to put 44 points on them. The Chippewas did have an opportunity in the game to possibly put another touchdown on the board, maybe go for an onside kick. There was a lot of complaints about a pass interference call that probably should have been flagged to extend their drive there. But 58-44, Central Michigan and Oklahoma State, number 12 Oklahoma State, exchanging blows on a Thursday night in the official Week 1 opener. OSU did lose to Central Michigan. Just a little history lesson here. Back in 2016, in a close game, Ohio State was trying to run the ball out in that particular game and actually threw the ball out of bounds on a 4th down with zeros on the clock rather than punt the ball away and risk something fluky happening. As it so happens, no men were downfield or past the line of scrimmage, so they actually drew a penalty flag. And since it was 4th down, it was a turnover, so Central Michigan got to run one untimed play down 3 points from their own 49-yard line in that 2016 matchup between the two. The ball was caught. The ball was up in the air. It was caught at the 9-yard line. The ball was then lateraled by the receiver backward as he was being tackled to a receiver that caught the ball, raced across the field east-west so that he could get away from defenders himself, and dove into the end zone at the last second to score a game-winning touchdown. The highlights on that are pretty crazy. Maybe I'll drop them in here. But that was the 2016 Oklahoma State Central Michigan game there. Very strange. I'm not sure why these two teams continue to play each other. But the 2022 win was Mike Gundy's 150th win with Oklahoma State. So there we go. Just a fun little lesson there on Central Michigan and Oklahoma State's mighty battles.
And Oklahoma State will move to 2-0 on the season. You know that there is respect from Mike Gundy for John Bonamigo. The officials getting together right now. And the flag is thrown.
John Bonamigo's kept clapping. The Chips are still in it.
Intentional grounding. Number 2 was still in the pocket, and there was no receiver in the area. That's a loss of down foul at the spot of the foul, and there will be one untimed down.
Wow.
First down, Central Michigan.
You can't just throw it up, I guess. There wasn't anybody in the area. They didn't run anybody down the field.
Hipper rush. He's in a shotgun. 3 players lined up essentially by the goal line. Rush, stepping up, throwing to Crow, catches the lateral. Here comes Willis racing to the end zone. Touchdown! Unbelievable! Central Michigan does it!
In a game that most other folks watched, Penn State at Purdue was the big highlight game for that Thursday. The Nittany Lions in a battle with the Boilermakers until Sean Clifford, the 20-year veteran at quarterback, puts together an 8-play, 80-yard touchdown drive for his 4th touchdown pass of the night to pull away 35-31, a rarity for him as the Nittany Lions would rely on a couple of very young, true freshman running backs to kind of put their offense together last year. But nevertheless, 4 touchdown passes, and he was competing with Aiden O'Connell on the other side. 365 yards, only 1 touchdown pass for him, but 59 attempts as the running attack for Purdue was atrocious last year. However, Charlie Jones really emerged as an elite receiver last year, as one of the better high-volume guys in the country for the Boilermakers. He had 12 catches on 19 attempts for 153 yards and a touchdown in that particular game against the Nittany Lions. He would finish on the year number 1 in the country in catches, number 2 in receiving yards, and number 5 in touchdowns. Top 5 in all 3 categories. Wild. But it would really be a preview of 2 of the arguably better teams in the Big Ten, with Purdue ultimately winning the West and the Nittany Lions coming just behind Ohio State and Michigan in the East. Friday was a much lighter slate, September 2nd. Michigan State was looking sluggish against Western Michigan, but pulled it out 35-13. It was a real indicator, though, not always, but in that particular case it was, of a rough season. Indiana beat Illinois 23-20 in the Illini second game of the season already. Tough loss for the Illini, though, as they would be in the West race in the Big Ten. But that defensive front just couldn't put Indiana away. Offense struggled a bit. Just a surprising loss when you look back on the season with how difficult time Indiana had and how really good Illinois was on the defensive front, and they struggled toward the back end of the season, but still a surprising loss. Old Dominion punched out a struggling Virginia Tech program 20-17. TCU smashes Colorado 38-13 in what would be an average margin of defeat for the Buffs on the season. Of course, this year 23-24, that'll be a big matchup with Deion Sanders, of course, taking the helm there at Colorado. So we will get to see that matchup in a much brighter light this upcoming season. Shane Morrison, the starting quarterback for TCU, leaves in the third quarter with a leg injury. The backup, who barely lost the starting job, Max Duggan, comes in for the last quarter, goes a modest 2 for 3 for 27 yards. Morris, before he went down, had 111. Not a great passing night. TCU had 275 yards on the ground, but that's where things started to get cooking there for TCU. Don't forget, Max Duggan was the backup there. Shane Morrison's back healthy this year, starting for TCU. What will he do at the quarterback position? Saturday, finally, the first big Saturday, and even that's arguable with the distribution of games, but first big Saturday, week 1 in the fall. North Carolina, who would be giving us a whole bunch of games that were interesting early. They survived Appalachian State 63-61, and this was on the tail end of giving up a bundle of points to the Florida A&M Rattlesnakes. They're snakes, I know that, in the week 0 game there. But Appalachian State was down 20 points in the fourth quarter. They outscored North Carolina 40-22 in the fourth. It's not even like they shut the offense down for the Tar Heels. No, there were 62 combined points scored in the fourth quarter. It was just nonstop points all over the place. Now, Appalachian State dropped a 2-point conversion to take the lead with 31 seconds left. The finish to this was even wilder than just 60-plus points scored. So they attempted an onside kick to get the ball back. UNC grabs the onside kick, returns it for a touchdown. Now, the problem with that is you're supposed to go down with the ball depending on timeout situation. Because returning the ball for a kick, for a touchdown, kicking the extra point, the margin's now 8 points again. So Appalachian State gets the ball back, down 8 points. 19 seconds is the difference. Appalachian State makes a big pass, gets the ball near midfield, scores again, scores yet again, and now they have to go for 2 for the tie. But they come up just short. Can't quite get it. But we were that close to going to overtime. Game didn't even go to overtime. 63-61 was the final. But it was just wild all the way up until the very end. Good Appalachian State team. North Carolina with an atrocious defense. So that made 2 weeks. 2 weeks, 2 games played, over 100 points, and just shy of 1,000 yards given up to Florida A&M and Appalachian State. Now, Drake May pitched another 352 yards and 4 touchdowns. He had 76 yards rushing and a rushing touchdown too, led his team in rushing, and that gave him 9 touchdowns on the year already and almost 800 yards, 700 plus yards. Chase Bryce, the quarterback for Appalachian State, had 6 touchdowns as well.
Bryce going towards the end zone. What else can this game bring us? Robinson, touchdown. And now they're a 2-point conversion away from tying it with 9 seconds left.
Well, Mark, you can't have that if you're North Carolina. You just can't have it.
Davis in motion. Bryce looking. He's going to try to run for it. He stopped short. He lost the football. North Carolina keeps Bryce out of the end zone.
That same afternoon, the NC State Wolf Pack struggles mightily against East Carolina. They get lucky, pull it out 21-20. NC State had a touchdown lead with 5.5 minutes to play. Devin Leary, the veteran quarterback, threw a bad interception that was returned to the Pirates' 30-yard line, and indeed they did sail right into the end zone. But they missed the extra point, so they were down 1. They were able to make a good stop, as they did most of the afternoon, and get the ball back from the Wolfpack, only to miss a 41-yard field goal as time was starting to run out on them, and that was it. Missed extra point for a tie game, missed field goal to win it. And NC State holds on to win despite the fact that they did not score in the second half of the game. Iowa survived South Dakota State 7-3. 396 total yards of offense between the two teams. An average of 0.4 yards per passing attempt. 17 total first downs. 7 for 33 combined on third down. 851 total punting yards on 21 punts and 4 fumbles. South Dakota probably could have won if they didn't have 12 penalties, but they were still right there. One bounce of the ball on literally any of these. Goofy passes, fumbles, something. But what a disgusting game. I definitely watched the last few minutes of that and could have lived without it. Virginia struggled with Richmond, 34-17. Texas A&M didn't exactly dazzle in a 31-0 win against Sam Houston, which, by the way, they bumped up to the top division here. And will join the Sun Belt Conference, I believe, this year. As a side note, UCLA gave up a few points in a 45-17 win over Bowling Green. Nebraska beat North Dakota 38-17. Kentucky beat Miami of Ohio 37-13. Washington State beat Idaho 24-17. Idaho's not even FCS level anymore. They dropped. I think they dropped all the way down to Division II. And South Carolina beat Georgia State, again a feisty team there, 35-14 as a few games that might ring a few bells. The Arizona Wildcats played San Diego State, and that was a 38-20 game. It was a big win. It was not expected for the Wildcats to grab that victory, as they had a tough non-conference schedule. But Jaden Delora there, 299 yards, 4 touchdowns. Jacob Cowling, one of the top receivers in the country that he kind of morphed into by the time the season was over with. A lot expected of him this year as well. 8 catches, 152 yards, 3 touchdowns. Just an under-the-radar receiver nationally. The Aztecs would keep the ball on the ground per Brady Hoke's style, still a forgettable name, and they recorded only 232 yards of offense total, and that would be a struggle the entire season. You can go through and count how many games they had with less than 300 yards of total offense. Really miserable for the Aztecs, who are making some changes going into this year. Houston had a big game against UTSA. Frank Harris, a great quarterback there, one of the best non-Power 5 quarterbacks, might be the best. Good receiving core. They will be again heading into this season, but a triple overtime win for Houston, who is projected to play Cincinnati in the American Conference Championship next game. Those two are thought to be on a collision course. They were not playing in the regular season, so it's thought to be just a pencil it in. They're probably going to end up in the conference championship game. Obviously, that did not happen. Frank there at quarterback, 330 yards passing, 63 rushing, 4 total touchdowns. Cypress, one of his top receivers there, 7 catches, 106 yards and a touchdown. Franklin, 9 for 100. Clark, 6 for 70 and 2 touchdowns. Clayton Tune for Houston at 4 total touchdowns. It was year 2 of the newer triple overtime rules. Once you get past 2 overtimes, it's one play moving forward to try and score 2 points. Essentially 2-point conversion overtimes moving forward. So that's how it went with UTSA falling to Houston in that triple overtime on the 1-play attempt. Tank Dell for Houston would be a beast on the season. Top receiver, number 1 in receiving yards nationally with just under 1,400. Number 2 in receptions with 109. That was 1 behind Charlie Jones at Purdue. Also number 1 in touchdowns nationally with 17. So 1-2-1 in those categories. Just an elite receiver. Florida, in another big game, one of the top billings, beat Utah, who came to town, 29-26 off a Cam Rising pick late in the end zone. Of course, another kind of tough game there for Anthony Richardson. His first as the starting quarterback, for sure. He chased Emory Jones out of there, who he was kind of competing with the previous season in 2021. But Anthony Richardson was able to put a drive together for a touchdown to take a lead. Cam Rising driving in the red zone again late, and just a tough pick at the very end of the game and not able to pull off a comeback there. So that was a big win for Billy Napier in game number 1, and Anthony Richardson coming in there with the starting spot locked down.
Right now, if you're Utah, you probably have to throw the ball given the 7 seconds off the clock.
Rising is 6 of 8 on this drive. 2nd and goal. 4-man rush. End zone. Intercepted! Yes! Amari Burney with a diving pick!
Emory Jones went on to Arizona State last season. This year he'll be playing at Cincinnati. So he's at 3 schools in 3 years. Much like JT Daniels bouncing around. 168 yards passing, 104 yards rushing, and 3 rushing touchdowns for Anthony Richardson in that game. Travion Thomas, 115 yards. Cam Rising had a tough go of it. But that was one of the premier games in that week 1, along with Arkansas in Cincinnati. Speaking of Bearcats, 31-24 in a very sloppy game. Lots of turnovers, lots of penalties. It was kind of boring, I dare say, with how gross it really was. The post-playoff run starting off against an SEC team went pretty well for Cincinnati hanging around, but the quarterback position was a big question mark post Desmond Ridder. Ben Bryant was fine, I guess. Not a lot of greatness from the quarterback position there. Cincinnati, again, didn't win the American Conference last year, as we remember, or we'll recap here. And again, Luke Fickell moved on after last season. So lots of changes going on for Cincinnati. They're moving to the Big 12. Just not a lot of inspiration from the quarterback position last year. KJ Jefferson would spend most of his year banged up. A lot of the secondary as well. And the back end for Arkansas was banged up. Lots of problems. Tough schedule. He had an okay stat line that particular game. 4 touchdowns, 1 on the ground, but not great without some of those scores, arguably. But that was a game that happened. So Georgia crushed Oregon 49-3 in what was another, probably the biggest headliner out of all 3 of those games. And it was over early. Now again, Oregon, new staff, new head coach in Dan Lanning, Bo Nix transferring in. The squad flew across the country to the Mercedes-Benz Stadium there and was throttled. It was supposed to be a neutral site game. Obviously, it's in the state of Georgia. Stetson Bennett had 368 yards, 2 touchdowns. Ironically, Georgia's season started out at it by thumping what turned out to be a really good football team. Just not quite on Georgia's level, but just a flattening early. Obviously, Oregon got its feet, or its webbed feet, under it and got it together there. But tough start to the season and really disappointing if you didn't catch, Florida, Utah, or a couple of the other games here, Arkansas, Cincinnati. I guess you weren't too disappointed if you missed that one, but that was supposed to be a premier game and it sucked. Now, number 2 Ohio State did beat number 5 Notre Dame 21-10. That was a bit of a slugfest as well. It was kind of Ohio State gradually pulling away in a fight in the trenches. Jackson Smith-Njigba was hurt, didn't return, got hurt early, and then didn't play much the rest of the season. Marvin Harrison Jr., who looked good at the end of 2021 again, held steady, played well. Emeka Obuka, 9 catches, 90 yards, touchdown. Notre Dame was blanked in the second half, only managed 253 yards total. Ohio State's defense held strong, looked good again with new defensive coordinator there, Jim Knowles out of Oklahoma State. And so a top 5 matchup, slow grind to the end though. Just a couple other noteworthy games here. Number 21, Ole Miss fought off Troy 28-10. Troy is not the traditional Sun Belt power that it was for a while in the maybe late 2010s. It's really fallen to the almost middle of the pack there. There's a lot of good teams in the Sun Belt. Appalachian State is one of them. Louisiana's been good. James Madison is in there now. Georgia Southern, Georgia State. Several teams in there are at least competitive, even if they don't always show up in the wins. It's a deep conference now. It's not just Troy wins 10 games every year and everyone else just hangs around and gets beat up. The Sun Belt is an interesting conference and has been for several years now, and looks to be at least moving forward, even though they're not big players as far as the Power 5 level and big players in some of the conference realignment. They're still a very interesting collection of teams to check out. But in this game, Zach Evans had 130 yards on the ground, the transfer. Judkins, the freshman, 87 yards and a touchdown for a potent ground game. Jackson Dart, who won the quarterback job over Luke Altmaier, was fine, 194 yards of offense and a touchdown. Lane Kiffin changed the entire offense after depending on the arm of Matt Corral in 2021, moved it to a ground-centric focused, really focusing on the running backs, and he was really successful. So it's really a credit to him in recognizing what he can do to fit the system to the players that he has on the team there. Will Rogers, in a game for Mississippi State, threw for 450 yards and 5 touchdowns in a 49-23 win over the Memphis Tigers. Great look for a good starter there. Cade McNamara starts his final game for Michigan in a 51-7 Colorado State win. There is another good game here. Oregon State beat Boise State 34-17. Noteworthy because Hank Bachmeier threw 2 picks early and hit the bench. Taylon Green would eventually take over the game here and the starting spot later on. He ran for 102 yards and a touchdown, threw for 155. Interesting sophomore. He officially has the starting job in 2023-24. His offensive coordinator would get fired a little bit down the line, and Hank would hit the transfer portal, so that would clear the way. But Oregon State looking good early over Boise State. Just something to keep an eye on. It is interesting to see how some of the Mountain West teams match up against some of the Pac-12 teams early in the season, I think, because some of the Mountain West squads are interesting competition there. Caleb Williams in his debut had 317 yards of offense and a 66-14 win against Rice. My first thought was, how the hell did you give up 14 points against Rice? And we would learn that would be problematic. Jordan Addison did have 2 touchdowns as well in his debut with the Trojans. Let's scamper along now to Sunday on opening weekend. Florida State and LSU, and it'll be a great rematch when we get it again this year. But they played in the Superdome in New Orleans. Jordan Travis for Florida State. Jaden Daniels, the Arizona State transfer, in at quarterback for the Tigers. Big first contest for Brian Kelly after departing Notre Dame. Florida State ultimately won the entertaining but sloppy game that actually showed that both teams would be trending upward. Florida State was up in the game 24-10 with just over 4 minutes to play. LSU was able to put a drive together to cut the lead to a touchdown with that much time left, 4 minutes. They were able to get a stop and then put together a 99-yard drive where they got all the way down to the 1 yard line with 1 second left, and a big pass by Jaden Daniels put the ball in the end zone. But the game ended when the extra point was blocked. The extra point was blocked. So 24-23 there was the final.
Speed option, and just throw it right out there in the flat off a mesh or a pick.
Let's decide it. Right here in New Orleans, Jaden Daniels to the end zone. To send us to overtime. It's blocked! It is blocked! It is blocked!
Storylines were kind of all over the place coming out of this. Keishawn Butte for LSU had 6 targets but only 2 catches for 20 yards. He was viewed as one of the top wideouts in the country coming into the season. He was upset during the game. He was upset after the game. I think it was one of those deals where he wiped his social media accounts of all LSU stuff. Thoughts that he might transfer all bubbled up because he wasn't as involved as he liked. Thought to be a top wide receiver pick in the draft. And just a lot of how to do about Butte. That didn't turn into a whole lot, as LSU had a very successful season there. He's now with the Patriots. They badly needed a difference maker, so maybe he'll get a shot there. But in this game, Jaray Jenkins had 5 catches on 5 targets for 46 yards and 2 touchdowns. He's now with Jacksonville Jaguars. Brian Thomas Jr. had 5 grabs. Malik Neighbors had 5 grabs. So we learned the whole wide receiver room is pretty loaded. Plus Daniels wouldn't have a breakout season passing the football. 209 yards passing here, 114 rushing. And that'd be a similar case moving forward in this year. He's going to do a little bit of both. Not a great passer, but he's going to have another loaded receiving room. That seems to be the trend, at least while he's under center there. This game had a missed field goal, a couple sloppy fumbles, just some sloppy play, and actually coined the term amongst my viewing friends of this is entertaining football, but not good football, to kind of describe what we're viewing, as it was an entertaining game, it was a fun game, it was a close game, but it was not well executed by either squad. So entertaining football and good football can be different things. So we came up with a few fun phrases out of that. This is entertaining but not good football. And that's how I would describe LSU and Florida State in 2022. Hopefully a little bit different moving forward. Monday was a standalone game. Clemson, and Clemson will have one again this upcoming year. Last year it was Clemson and Georgia Tech. 41-10 was the final. Wasn't beautiful for Clemson, who brought the fears of a lingering, disappointing 2021 to life. After dominating first three quarters that only resulted in a 24-10 lead. I did watch the back half of this game, but the Tigers just blew out Georgia Tech appropriately on the scoreboard in the fourth quarter. They just, not a good Georgia Tech team. So kind of a unfortunate ending to a great slate of games, with Monday turning into a blowout. But at least you thought Georgia Tech had a shot for a little while there, despite the huge discrepancy in playability and competition there. I should mention that LSU-Florida game actually came down to a blocked field goal. That's how Florida State ended up winning that game. That was the last note that I had here. Just a sloppy game, though. Blocked field goal. Great by Florida State, but just a tough way to lose that game. It just figures. It should be very interesting heading into the 23-24 season with that game early on the docket. But the years of not having big non-conference games the first couple weeks are really gone. We're going to have good games throughout the first few weeks of the season. So heading into week 2 then, the big game. In week 2, we already had Florida-Utah, Arkansas-Cincinnati, and Oregon-Alabama, and Florida State-LSU. So week 2, big game. And it is again this year. Alabama, number 1, heading to Austin, Texas to take on the Longhorns. And it was 10-10 at halftime. Bryce Young struggled. He finished with 213 yards and a touchdown. Quinn Ewers, in only his second game as a starter. A lot of hype about this kid. Top recruit in the 2020 recruiting class. I'm sure COVID interrupted his high school playing days. Enrolled early in Ohio State, sat on the bench, transferred to Texas. So just not a lot of actual playing for this guy. And he was still 18, maybe 19 years old, just super young. He injured his shoulder in the first half, and it looked not great. Hudson Card was able to finish the game, still a starter quality quarterback, and he'll be starting for Purdue this season after transferring. But the offensive numbers weren't great for either team. Card passed for 158, Ewers were for 134. Bijan Robinson was going to be the focal point of the offense the entire season. He had 57 yards rushing at less than 3 yards per carry. Did have 73 yards receiving. Jahmyr Gibbs had 18 total touches for 173 yards and 2 touchdowns for the Tide. Alabama had 15 penalties, which was the talking point coming out, the most in the Saban era. That led to speculation that the Tide could be in trouble, and Texas could have won the game if Ewers was healthy. 33-yard field goal is what it took for Alabama to knock this game out. Young scrambled for 20 yards on the last drive, pulling out of a sack, actually, to keep a play alive and get a nice chunk of yardage. It wasn't on a key 4th down or 3rd and long or anything like that, but he did grab a critical 20-yard dodging a sack, pulling out and running 20 yards to help set up this big 33-yard field goal. 20-19 is the final in the game, as sights look great for Texas moving forward despite a loss, and not so great for Alabama coming out. And you can kind of debate, really, on the final results of both of their seasons. Alabama obviously missed the playoff, and Texas didn't even make the Big 12 championship game, but at least the narrative coming out of that game was, as stated, Alabama in trouble because it was so close, and Texas looking good because it was so close. Just puts a different perspective with how highly regarded Alabama really has been the past decade.
Young under pressure, plays contained. Young runs it. Young, first down and more. What a play by the Heisman Trophy winner. Bryce Young A 19-yard gain, dodging bullets.
The transfer from Ohio State misses the tackle. Boom, Young dips under. Look at him, he goes down. Dips in towards the line of scrimmage, and then he's outside. Oh, the flexibility, athleticism, the awareness.
Young, sidearms, caught, and out of bounds.
Position here, right hash, for a field goal to potentially win it.
Riker tied a career high earlier today with a 52-yarder. This one from 33 yards away. Clean snap, good hole, and once again right down Main Street. And Alabama takes a 20-19 lead with 10 seconds remaining.
Ohio State had no problems with Arkansas State. Jackson Smith Najigba still out after the Notre Dame game. Harrison and Fleming was also out for this one, but Harrison stepped into a bigger role here. 45-12 was the final there. 351 and 4 touchdowns for Stroud. Harrison had 7 catches, 184 and 3 touchdowns. Kansas State buried Missouri in a Power 5 out-of-conference battle. 40-12 was the final there. Deuce Vaughn, 6 yards per carry, 145 and 2 touchdowns. Adrian Martinez only had 101 yards passing. Didn't look super impressive, but his ability to scramble in the Deuce Vaughn's legs were really the offense for Kansas State last year. 16 Arkansas plucks off South Carolina 44-30 a week after the big Cincinnati win, so they looked good kind of starting off there early. KJ Jefferson, 295 on the ground against the Cox there. Raheem Sanders had 156 and 2 touchdowns. KJ Jefferson was able to put up some modest numbers. North Carolina moved to 3-0, 35-28 over Georgia State. Another close game because the Panthers scored 25 straight points at one point in this game, and it was tied going into the fourth. UNC had to put a fumbled Georgia State ball into the end zone late in this one. So, number 8, Notre Dame stifled at home by Marshall, 26-21. This is one of the big upsets. A sluggish game builds to the fourth quarter. Only 4 touchdowns in the game. This is a bleed over from the Ohio State loss the previous week. Buckner, another bummer game where the passing attack wasn't much of anything. He's the leading rusher as well with 44 yards, 2 touchdowns. Michael Myers, the tight end, has a touchdown and 8 grabs for 101 yards. But a terrible loss to start with for Notre Dame there. Marshall last year was actually the number 1 third down defense in the country. Only gave up 23% on third down conversions. They were just ahead of Georgia, Oklahoma State, Air Force, and Minnesota, rounding out the top 5 there. Florida was one of the worst. They were 129th out of 131 teams. Oregon was 123rd. Washington was 118. So Pac-12 teams at the top there had a handful of them. Utah, Oregon, Washington, UCLA, USC. And offense was never a problem. Defense for some of the key teams there, USC, Washington, Oregon, UCLA, defense was a big problem. Now, on the offensive side, 8 teams converted over 50% on third down. Washington was number 1 in the country on the flip side of things. USC was number 2, leading to my point there. Minnesota was number 3. Great third down defense, great third down offense. Florida State was 4, Georgia 5, UCLA 6, Kansas 7, Utah 8. All over 50% in the top 8 in the country. Again, Washington, USC, UCLA, Utah, great offenses there. On the flip side, Oregon and Washington struggling with third down defense. Number 6, Texas A&M welcomes Appalachian State in, fresh off the North Carolina loss. And the Mountaineers able to knock off Texas A&M 17-14, grab a win over a Power 5 here. Haynes King for the Aggies put up 3 touchdowns against Sam Houston State, but only 95 yards passing against Appalachian. Running back Devon Achane would account for a large chunk of the team's running yardage and catch a lot of balls out of the backfield. So the offense was horrible last year for the Aggies, and Achane would be a big piece of the offensive yardage. Tennessee plays another tough game. They're ranked 24th. They beat number 17 Pitt 34-27 in overtime. The Panthers just can't find the end zone. Israel Abanikanda, can't pronounce the last name. The workhorse back for the program has 25 carries for 154 yards and a touchdown. Slovic, the other USC transfer there, quarterback, less than 200 yards passing. While Hooker, 325 yards and 2 touchdowns for the Vols. Cedric Tillman, 9 catches for 162 and a touchdown. He's hurt for a good chunk of the season as well. Jalen Hyatt steps up as one of the leading receivers in the country. Brew McCoy as well would step into a big role. Number 19, Wisconsin loses 17-14 at home to Washington State. A week after scampering past Idaho, Washington State is able to fly across the country and knock off the Badgers behind Incarnate Word transfer quarterback Cameron Ward. Texas Tech wins 33-30 over number 25 Houston in overtime. This is the same Houston team that survived UTSA in week 1. But not Texas Tech here in week 2 in extra innings. Donovan Smith, was quarterback for the Red Raiders after Tyler Shaw hurt his shoulder in the blowout win in week 1 over Murray State. 380 yards of total offense, 3 touchdowns, 3 picks for Smith. He's transferring somewhere else this year. Shaw himself was originally from Oregon. He should be healthy again for this season, but missed a good chunk of the middle of last year. Derek Parrish, the defensive end for Houston, logged 4.5 sacks, 6.5 tackles for loss. He's now a Jacksonville Jaguar. Iowa lost 10-7 to Iowa State. That's all I have to say there. Kansas beat West Virginia 55-42 in overtime. A pick 6 locked up the game there. Jade Daniels turns into a big star for Kansas as they start off 6-0, I believe, and kind of fade down the stretch there as the defense is horrific, but the offense is actually one of the best in the country. Number 20 Kentucky wins in Gainesville 26-16 over a now number 12 ranked Florida team. The Wildcats offensive line would be a pain point, but the defense held Anthony Richardson to 14-35 passing, 143 yards, 2 picks, only 4 yards on the ground. Gross game. Nebraska gets beat by Georgia Southern 45-42. They give up 642 yards of offense, commit 10 penalties. GSU gives them 2 helpers in the way of interceptions, and they still lose. Scott Frost is finally fired, and it's a week or 2 ahead of where his buyout would have been cheaper, but the pressure is too much, I believe, and they got to get rid of him here. Auburn struggles against San Jose State 24-16 in another early game that has you kind of looking funny at a team. And Auburn does struggle through the rest of the year, but they have to survive San Jose State early. Also for fun, Idaho led 10-0 over Indiana at the half. They ultimately lose the game, but Idaho early on looked good against Washington State, almost beat them, then led against Indiana. And again, that's a team that dropped down a level, joined the Big Sky Conference and finished 7-5 on the season. So just a mental note, they play at Nevada and at Cal this year, so watch out for the Idahos there. Number 10 USC beat Stanford 41-28. Again, a lot of points to give up. Caleb Williams 341, 4 touchdowns. Jordan Addison 7 receptions, 172 and 2 touchdowns. Michigan crushes Hawaii. J.J. McCarthy looks good, 229, 3 touchdowns, 11-12 passing in the first half. McCarthy does get in a little bit for the second, but mostly handoffs. Donovan Edwards gets hurt in the first half. This is big because Corum takes over for a good chunk of the year. He averages 9.8 yards per carry here on 9 touches and will turn into the lead back for the rest of the year. Oregon bounces back from the Georgia lost by beating East Washington 70-14, gets that offense clicking. Oregon State gets another win over Fresno State 35-32 a week after beating Boise State. Jake Haener for Fresno State throws for 360 yards and a touchdown. Jordan Mims scampers for 122 and 2 touchdowns, and a penalty crazy game, but the Beavers are able to gnaw their way out. Number 21 BYU beats number 9 Baylor 26-20 in overtime. Turns out to not be as impactful a game as both teams really struggled throughout the year. But again, Baylor won the Big 12 Conference Championship game the year previous. BYU is returning the most production in the country, I believe. The game was kind of a snoozer. Went to overtime. Both teams struggled throughout the rest of the year. Arizona loses 39-17 to Mississippi State, just gets thumped. Will Rogers pitches another 313 and 4 touchdowns, the veteran quarterback for Mississippi State. Jaden DeLora struggles and throws 3 interceptions after the good performance against a solid defense with San Diego State in week 1. In a game nobody watched, worth noting in week 1, Bowling Green lost to Eastern Kentucky, lower level there, 59-57 in 7 overtimes. Now again, once you start the third one, it's the one play for 2 points, back and forth shootout basically. But still, 59-57, 7 overtimes to Eastern Kentucky, a lower level opponent there. So just wild. Week 3 of the college football season saw Florida State move to 3-0 on a Friday night game with a win over Louisville. Malik Cunningham was supposed to have a shot at quarterbacking the Louisville Cardinals to possibly an ACC title after 4 years as a starter, but they dropped to 1-2 instead. Malik Cunningham just the other night had a great preseason game with the New England Patriots, so keep an eye on that. Maybe he'll get a shot at making a roster in the NFL there. Long tenured starter, can move with his feet. Looked good the other night. Jordan Travis was 13 for 17 with 2 touchdowns before he went down in the second quarter. Tate Roadmaker finished that game out. Tayshawn Ward had 10 carries for 126 yards for the Seminoles. Malik Cunningham had 127 on the ground, 243 in the air, 3 touchdowns, 2 turnovers, too many penalties. LSU and Louisville gave Florida State 2 Power 5 wins with Duquesne in the mix there early in the season. So it looked good for the Seminoles early. A lot of blowouts that week. Number 1 Georgia over South Carolina 48-7. Of course, we saw the great end of the season for the Gamecocks, but they looked sluggish early. Alabama over Louisiana Monroe 63-7. Ohio State 77-21 over Toledo. 5 touchdowns, 367 yards from CJ. Michigan 59-0 over UConn. Corum had 5 touchdowns on 12 carries during that game. Clemson 48-20 over Louisiana Tech. Well, Shipley, the star running back there, 12 carries for 139 yards and 2 touchdowns. Ungale 17 for 29 for 221 yards, 2 touchdowns, 62 on the ground as well. Oklahoma was still ranked 6th at the time. They rolled Nebraska 49-14. It was intern coach Mickey Joseph's first game at the helm there for the Huskers. Dylan Gabriel, 230 yards and 2 touchdowns for the Sooners. Eric Gray, running back, 113 yards and 2 touchdowns. USC was 7th. They beat up on Fresno State 45-17. Number 8, Oklahoma State at the time buried Arkansas Pine Bluff. Number 9, Kentucky, no problem with Youngstown State. Will Levis did put up 377 yards in the air, 2 touchdowns, 2 picks. The Wildcats' offensive line was really bad last year, behind only Colorado State, Akron, Boston College, and Tulsa in sacks allowed, so bottom 5 in the nation there. Utah smashed San Diego State 35-7, 4 touchdowns for Mr. Rising. Tennessee buried Akron. Baylor was still ranked 17th. They buried Texas State. Ole Miss shut out Georgia Tech. Texas beat UTSA 41-20. Bijan Robinson, 3 touchdowns and 183 yards. Penn State destroyed Auburn in what was supposed to be a great game, but they went on the road there. 41-12 was the final. Singleton, 10 carries, 124 yards, and 2 touchdowns. We'll see more stat lines like that this upcoming season. Pittsburgh beat Western Michigan 34-13. Israel, 31 carries, 133 yards, and a touchdown there. The Arkansas Razorbacks, after punching out Cincinnati and South Carolina, struggled to fend off Missouri State, the Bears, 38-27. The back end of the defense gave up 357 passing yards. KJ Jefferson threw 385 of his own. The defense did combine for 8 sacks, 9 tackles for loss, 5 accounted passes defended. 3 turnovers really hurt them, and a punt return for a touchdown was the difference in that one. So great job by the front 7, bad job by the back end, but they did end up pulling away from the Missouri State Bears there. Michigan State flew across the country to play a big game against Washington, and Michael Penix Jr. really showed his true form here in the third game of the season. Huskies scored 20 points in the second quarter in a 39-28 win. He had 397 yards and 4 touchdowns. Of course, the former Indiana Hoosier, famous for the goal line extension that was ultimately ruled good on a 2-point conversion to beat Penn State again in that COVID year. And then he had a lost season in the 2021-22 year before transferring across the country there and landing in Washington. Michigan State, on the other hand, would go on to have one of the worst passing defenses in the country. Of course, they struggled against Western Michigan in the opener. They crushed Akron in week 2, going down 36-14 heading into the fourth quarter. Just never really had a shot in this one. They really blew it. There'll be a rematch this upcoming season. Number 25, Oregon got the offense clicking. Of course, getting blasted dropped them down the rankings quite a bit there, but they were able to take down number 12, BYU, 41-20. Bo Nix ran the offense wonderfully, putting up 5 touchdowns, 3 on the ground, 13 for 18 passing. BYU had to abandon the run when Oregon scored points on its first 5 possessions. One of the big night games was number 13 Miami playing number 24 Texas A&M. The Hurricanes going down to College, or I should say over to College Station, just shifting a little west there. They lost 17-9. This was an atrocious game to watch. You certainly came away thinking, are both of these teams pretty good, or are both of these teams really going to struggle? Not a great offensive output. Tyler Van Dyke didn't look very good. I can't even remember. Haynes King was playing quarterback still for Texas A&M there. It's really a moot point now. Connor Wingman would eventually take over for Texas A&M in the back 4 or 5 games of the season, and he'll be the starter heading into 23-24. But this was really a reflection point looking back on the season. Number 13 Miami at number 24 Texas A&M, and how both teams were completely unable to put points on the board and looked really woeful overall on the football field there. Northwestern fell to Southern Illinois. That was not great, but just a reflection of how terrible the season was going to go for them. Number 19, Wake Forest beat Liberty 37-32. A failed 2-point conversion prevented the upset there. Number 16, NC State puts points up early in a 27-14 win against Texas Tech, and they just kind of slept walk to the win there. Another team that just couldn't quite get the offense going despite a really good quarterback there. Number 18, Florida won the big game against Utah, then turned around and lost to Kentucky, then struggled with an easy guy in South Florida. 31-28 was the final. Only 7 points scored in the second half overall. Anthony Richardson struggled. 136 yards and 2 picks passing. Well, of course, 2 picks passing, but 136 yards. Not great for Anthony Richardson there. And you start to wonder how he made it up to be a top selection based on some of the statistical categories, but some of the raw tools is what you'll hear NFL scouts talk about. So we'll see how he produces with the Indianapolis Colts this upcoming season. Purdue falls to 1-2, and Syracuse moves to 3-0 after a 32-29 game Another close one for the Boilermakers after falling to Penn State, of course, in the opener. Aiden O'Connell this time, 39 for 56 passing, 424 yards and 3 touchdowns. His guy, Charlie Jones, 11 catches for 188 and a touchdown. Again, no ground game for the Boilermakers. Sean Tucker, the top running back for the Syracuse Orange, struggles, but his quarterback, Garrett Schrader, leads the team in passing and rushing for the game. He throws a late touchdown to win the game for Syracuse despite 180 fewer yards of offense and only a 25% conversion rate on third down. 13 penalties and a big turnover really hurt Purdue in the loss. Louisville, 31-7 over UConn as well. UConn and Purdue were Syracuse's only big wins there. So Syracuse kind of building a hollow record as it continued in the first half of the season there. Notre Dame bounces back from the Marshall loss by beating Cal 24-17. Still not a good look for the Irish early in the season there, as they were getting a lot of national attention for the tough wins and losses there. UCLA wins over South Alabama 32-31 on a late field goal. That was another near big upset there by the Bruins early on, almost taking one right at home. Tulane wins a big game on the road over Kansas State 17-10 to move to 3-0. KSU's passing ability looked really questionable early for a team that would eventually go on to win the Big 12. Of course, we learned that Tulane is for real as well, and that defense was really good last season, eventually beating USC in a New Year's Six bowl game. Only 150 yards passing for Adrian Martinez, the former Nebraska Cornhusker there. Tulane's defense was great. Both teams had exactly 336 yards of offense. The Green Wave forces 2 turnovers. Arizona survived North Dakota State 31-28 as they'd continue their up and down year. Arizona State loses 30-21 to Eastern Michigan and then loses its head coach as they fire Herm Edwards. He had a number of questionable recruiting allegations as well. Nothing major, but was supposedly having recruiting visits during a agreed upon dead period during COVID, and that amongst some horrible losses ultimately led to his exit. Kansas moves to a shocking 3-0 and pushes Houston to a shocking 1-2 after a 48-30 win. Didn't look good for the Cougars, and it really wouldn't the rest of the year. But Kansas, 3 wins already in 3 games. Shocking. LSU beats Mississippi State 31-16. The Tigers shut down Will Rogers in that offense, held him to 214 yards, touchdown, and a pick. Maryland has 15 penalties, but beats SMU 34-27. And Iowa takes down Nevada 27-0. It's kind of like water in the desert. 20-plus points by Iowa is a rarity. So 27-0, blanking the Nevada Wolfpack there. That is your walkthrough of Week 3 of the college football season there. So that's a review of the first chunk of the 2022 college football season. Wednesday, I'll be dropping the second part. Thanks for hanging in for a long one here, fighting through my respiratory issues. And just thanks for checking back in and hanging in with me. Be back on Wednesday. This is the Michael Welch Podcast.